obligation for countries to implement environmental friendly from the WTO itself. We say that there are countries who care about the environment, but there are also countries who don't care. They use environmental destruction to minimize the cost of production, namely countries such as China, who uses it and capitalize on this environmental destruction. Right? We say that status quo is problematic. Why? Because the harm is not the environmental in itself. It also harms the economy. Exactly what you said in GMDP last year. Hurricane Katrina, for example, had caused a lot of billions of profit that could be potential, but it's not there. Bangladesh flood, for example, is happening and caused a lot of problems on the transportation of goods and services, therefore it hampers the economy as a whole. Therefore we say that when it comes to economical problems, firstly, we believe that it's the responsibility of the WTO to create all of this, to solve this problem. We say that's ideal prerequisite. But secondly, we also say that this proposal will be effective in changing the policy of countries who are not environmental friendly. Mechanisms. We say we're going to have a time frame, right? In order for this country to implement the waste management service, for example, also technology, green technology that will be advocated for these countries in order for them to have environmental friendly policies. We also want them to have law enforcement regarding the environmental friendly. We say that this is the mechanism. We say that if this country cannot, we say that they could be kicked out of this, but second, we say that they can also seek help by another country to help them to implement this environmental friendly. First argument, why we believe that this ideal prerequisite for WTO as a trade organization. We need to analyze what is the purpose of the World Trade Organization, which is to ease the access of trades. Right? To achieve this, we need several prerequisites. Firstly, we believe that the ideal prerequisite is the one who can ensure the sustainable economy. That is why the WTO and the current status quo impose the prerequisite of creating a minimum wage. Why? Because it is important for the economic sustainability. Because if we don't have this, it will hamper the purchasing power of individuals within the countries on how this will affect the economy as a whole. It will affect the free trade as a whole. Environment, also the same cases. It also hampers the sustainability of the economy. Right? Why? Because the environmental damages in the current status quo is hampering the economy and the market within the free trade area, within the countries involved itself. How? For example, the transportation and distribution of goods is going to be affected by the environmental disaster that would caused by the non-environmental friendly. For example, how the flood, hurricane, haze, for example, that hampers the plane from flying and distributing stuff, but also hampers the transportation of land, also the sea transportation and stuff. They can't transport it efficiently, we say it hampers. Secondly, in terms of productions, right? We say that production also harms because of the non-environmental friendly. Why? For example, we say that it creates pollution, for example. We say it's going to hamper the agricultural product. Why? For example, the pollution of water causing the acid rain to fall in agriculture and how this will fail as the agricultural product. But secondly, it also leads to disaster on how it's going to be a failure of the agricultural product itself and how they cannot sell on this. We say it's going to hamper the production itself. Thirdly, we say it's going to create problem of labor. Why? Because the problem of pollution, it's going to create health issues for workers within the service of goods companies itself. We're going to hamper the productivity of the labor. So we say it's going to be harmful for the economy, sustainability of the free trade area itself. Second parameter, we say it's going to has to be fair. That's why WTO and the current status quo ensure the fairness of member countries. That's why they have the prerequisite of minimum wage too, so that countries will not exploit on the wage itself to minimize the cost of production within the country's companies itself. Right? We don't want this to happen because we want a universal one. This is also with the environment. Why? Because with different environmental policy, it is unfair for free trade. In the current status quo, liberal countries are implementing the environmental friendly policy, which maximizes the cost of production. It's going to be more expensive to product the same product as countries who are not doing the environmental policy itself. It's going to be cheaper for this country. They deliberately exploit the environmental destruction for the efficiency of product. That's what happened in China, right? How they don't have waste management that's proper. It's going to be, yes, it's actually costing them less, but it's causing the environment as a whole. We say it's not fair for these countries to have different costs for the same production. We say it's not fair. WTO's responsibility is to ensure the fairness of the member countries to compete in a free trade area. We say it's not fair. Yes.
Are you saying that economic trend is not sustainable?
Well, we say that in current status quo it is not sustainable, but in our proposal we say it's going to be sustainable. Second argument why we are effective in creating sustainable economy is that, firstly, they might say that the country might opt out from the WTO itself, but they won't, right? It's going to be effective. This prerequisite will be followed by the countries. Firstly, why? Because we believe that the prerequisite, the assumption of the countries from the WTO is going to create an economical cost for the countries. Why? Because the export and import from the WTO members is very important for the income of the countries. Most of the countries in current status quo are joining WTO. Who are not in the WTO is only like North Korea and Cuba, countries who don't have economy to begin with. So we say it's going to be easy to change it's going to hamper the income of the states if they hamper the export and export, say that they have a calculation to change. But secondly, it's also going to create a political cost for the countries itself. Why? In the current status quo, they say it's fine, right? People in the current status quo of the society does not demand the government to change the non-environmental friendly policy. Why? Because they think that is not wrong to begin with. But in our proposal, we're going to create a political cost. Why? Because the people will not receive the goods and benefits all from the WTO, will not have the goods and service coming from exporting countries. They will not have, their options is going to be limited. They're going to demand their own government to implement more environmental policy to go back to the WTO. But they might say that this country cannot begin with because they don't have money, right? But we say that this country could obtain the money. Why? Because they can have more cooperation with countries who are already liberal and already environmental friendly, such as the REDD that Indonesia have with Norway. So this country will help the developing country even if they cannot have their money themselves. So we say it's actually feasible. That's why we say that our proposal it is the ideal prerequisite for WTO to impose in order to create a more and more easy fair trade area, easier access to the economy. But secondly, we also believe that it's effective. We back to the proposal.
Opposition also regrets when environmental degradation happens. But this debate is not only talking about how we solve the problem of environment, but also talking about whether or not how WTO should impose a discriminatory policies toward vulnerable actors, developing countries. There is not going to be able to comply with that, ladies and gentlemen. That is an unrealistic burden that they have to prove in this debate, right? And we believe that their policy is not going to resolve it. It's going to aggravate the problem on how you're going to make the gap on development is going to be even bigger. That's why we don't want to go with their ideas, right? Secondly, also we say that they never prove to you what is a free trade agreement to begin with, how important it is to make sure that everyone has access to that, which I'm going to prove in my speech. The stance of side opposition is simple. We believe at conducting free trade amongst nations, you should not use environmental standard as prerequisite, you should use it as optional, and you should not create a uniform burden between developed and developing countries. And you can still approach countries to care about environment without sacrificing the main purpose of WTO to create a functioning economy and establish a fair trade between nations. Before I go into my positive case, two major points of rebuttal. First of all, they said the purpose of WTO is to create an ideal prerequisite to create a stable economy. They give you the example of minimum wage. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, the principle that you should believe, that WTO believes in, is to see whether or not that prerequisite, that their policy is discriminatory or not, or representative towards the needs and interests of their member countries, ladies and gentlemen. They also need to see the ability of countries to comply and to comply and update into that. We say the trajectory of development between developed and developing countries is very much different. Therefore, their principle is not fair. When they're talking about minimum wage, that is completely different, right? Because it is talking about a human dignity that every country is still able to comply to that legislation. It is completely different with environmental standards, because in order for you to be able to get the level of development that is environmentally friendly, you need a lot of steps, which I'm going to explain in my rebuttals, right? And when they talk about health issue for workers, first of all, right now, ladies and gentlemen, in order for you to create a better circumstances for workers, you need to improve the security of equipment and also impose punishment to exploitative companies, which we also already covered in the state law. There is an internal motivation from companies and also government to make sure that the people are not exploited, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, about how they said political costs will change them. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, it is going to take a very big time to begin with. And secondly, they never explain to you why WTO is that powerful to make sure this country is going to impose that. That's why we say that their case falls. My argument, first of all, why at imposing prerequisite, you should not create unrealistic burden that disproportionately disadvantage vulnerable countries after there's developing countries that they want to help the most, right? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, what is actually the purpose of WTO? WTO is a supranational organization that is the founders are developed countries like US and UK that focuses to improve the condition of economy throughout the world, ladies and gentlemen. Their main focus is to make sure that trade is accessible to all nations, regardless you are developed or you're developing countries. That's why they should treat developed countries and also developing countries in the equal treatment, ladies and gentlemen, because they see that certain countries have comparative advantage, right? They have the geographical advantage, like natural resources, and etc. Therefore, they need to be able to help each other to create a more healthy economy. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, to engage in a free trade agreement is a highly important thing, and for every country, especially for developing countries, right? Because you're going to reduce the tariff, you're going to decrease the barrier of trade, and you're going to cut like certain administration costs, and also have a better political standing for developing countries to show that I also have something that you need, developed countries, right? But this is very important. WTO should acknowledge that countries are still in a different level of development. The development trajectory of every country is different. If you impose like a very big standard of environmental standard, it's not going to happen. For ladies and gentlemen, developed countries is able to have like great technology because they already are already at a phase that they conduct practices that sacrifice the environment, right? That's why they have a stable economy right now, right? In developing countries, they're not yet at that level, ladies and gentlemen. That's why in Brazil, in China, and Africa, they're still on the level of developing their own countries, and also we say right now, already changed, already happened, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, why is a bad fair? Why their policy is not a fair policy? First of all, what you need to make a fair prerequisite is that when you acknowledge that these countries want to contribute to the market and you want a common interest to be cooperative to make sure that healthy economy is going to happen, right? But the scenario that will happen in their side of the house is that developed countries is going to dominate the free trade agreement to begin with. That is not fair, ladies and gentlemen. You show that their policy is unrepresentative to the member and also biased towards developed countries. It is an unfair burden. But most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we say that it is very hard at the end of the day for the developing countries to opt in into that unrealistic expectation because it is very, very expensive for you to have like a stable environment, environmentally factory, for example, and the ability of developing countries to enter that is very minimum, ladies and gentlemen. That's why at the end of the day, we say it harms the dynamics of how WTO as an economic organization works, and free trade in WTO is going to be dominated by development. Sit down. Second argument, why is going to widen the gap of development in between developing country and developed country, and that is going to hurt the society in developing countries. At the end of the day, no sustainable development on their side of the house. Now we say there's already a huge gap. When you're talking about development between developing countries and developing countries, it's not only talking about economy, but also about the standard of environment and also a lot of things, right, ladies and gentlemen? Right now, we say that it is very important for you to be involved as a developing country in free trade agreement with developing countries because you're going to cut unnecessary costs that is going to be reduced, right? Tariff, administration, and also reduce bureaucracy, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you engage in free trade agreement, your country can have a bigger profit development of that country. For example, healthcare, education, and also environmental protection, ladies and gentlemen. Also law enforcement. Right now, why a lot of developing countries are unable to show that their law enforcement is that strong, because the mechanism is not that perfect, right? That we say, to create the law enforcement and also environmental friendly policy, you need a research and development that is very expensive. In your side of the house, you impede the ability of developing countries to develop themselves. You are going to reduce the number of profit that the government will have for this year. And at the end of the day, developing countries are going to be trapped in a condition when they're unable to work and maximize their ability to have a more environmental friendly policy and also to conduct practices that they want. That's why, in their side of the house, we're going to have a very discriminative body that is not representative. We are very proud of it.
Opposition stand up here and say that WTO cannot be discriminatory, but they also say it's okay to impose minimum wage because the value of human dignity is international responsibility. And we think if you try to destroy the environment, you jeopardize the lives of people in Bangladesh whose homes is being taken down. You jeopardize the economical capability of countries whose lands are being destroyed by Hurricane Katrina because China's pollute the ocean and the air even more. So we think if you want to try to human dignity, we're the one who protects and create equal protection to human dignity what the WTO should lead to. But before that, they also complain to us that it's an unfair burden for countries. But first of all, we're going to talk to you about how it should be a fair burden, right? And I will discuss it later in my speech. But we think that it's actually still a fair burden for developing countries to comply to this. Because, like they say, right, the developing country can actually get money from WTO, which means they can actually have the economic capacity to pay for their requirements, to pay for better services. And secondly, when we're talking about developing countries, international society right now also aware that these countries cannot do it by themselves. Therefore, that's why UN, Norway, they're willing to give $10 billion of Argentine money to India, to Venezuela, to Indonesia, to help them to cope with the requirements and the money. Burden cannot stand. But they say that it could not be beneficial for WTO because the WTO itself cannot be discriminatory. They have to create a fair standard. But we think we're the one who was going to create a standard in this case. Why is that so, ladies and gentlemen? Because first, I want to debunk the idea of fairness. Because we think that the nature of WTO is not only about fairness. We're also talking about sustainable economy. Because WTO is an economic body. They have an interest to always preserve the economy so they can grow. The future benefits of economy can still be preserved in the society, right? That's why WTO right now also impose minimum wage because it's important country to have a buying power for their citizens to buy products. And we think the parameter of sustainable development is also in line with the parameter of environment, because the natural resources that we have right now is contingent to the protection of environmental destruction, because the environment is destroyed. Now, you cannot get food, you cannot get oil, you cannot get any other services and industry because the land is destroyed, because the source of your economical power is destroyed, right? You cannot do that. And on the level of how WTO should not be discriminatory, we think that right now even WTO is discriminatory, because when the methods of reproduction harms other people, when your methods of production create a comparative advantage that is unfair and harmful. That's why we ban cheap labor, because it's an unfair exploitative methods of the society itself. We ban protectionism of countries because it hurts the economical powers of other countries. And we think when China actually exploits their environment, creating a cheap prices at the cost and expense of other countries, it is also something that is not a method that WTO should validate. It's a method that harms people that WTO should ban. That's why we don't think even if it's discriminatory, it still needs to be banned. But then again, they say, right, about Christie's argument about how it's not an unfair, proportional burden to developed and developing countries. Well, I will explain this in my extension. And in my extension itself, why we think inherently is actually all countries have an equal responsibility and burden when it comes to the protection of environment, right? First of all, yes.
If they concern so much about sustainability, WTO has a more direct resources budget. But exactly because the country relies on environmental damaging, it's driving motivation to internal change. Why WTO needs to step in?
Oh, yeah, about the internal change. Right now, there is no internal change. China has been built up since a lot of time. They have still foreign countries, they still create Beijing is the most oldest city on earth. Even China has funds, they have money, they do not want to change. Why? Because the way they have derived this fund is from the exploitative comparative advantage in the WTO that's open right now. That's why even if you have money, you will not suddenly change. You have an international society to force you to change, right? And this is the way you inherently is not enough, and international society has to impose to this. No, thank you. I have it's an area there.
Okay, take one. So right now, Brazil environment is changing, ladies and gentlemen, progressing. China already put like more investment. That is an internal change.
If Brazil right now is really changing, then why does Brazil will not fulfill the requirements of the Because if we're talking about countries with already developed countries that want to really change, well, it's okay. They only comply to the rules and requirements of WTO. Madam, sir, now not for extension. Why we think environmental protection should be proportional responsibility for both developed and developing countries. Now, what is the parameter of equal responsibility? We think that everyone is responsible of their action when their action do not only harm or impact themselves, but also impact the international society as a whole. That's why we think that when you also have international law regarding sovereignty, for example, because when you talk about sovereignty, it's not only for individual states, it's also about other countries. That's why you have also rules about methods of wars and things like that. And we think the same should also go to environment, because the environmental conduct that you do in your country will not only harm your country. Environment is an ecosystem, it's an intertwined system, right? And if you do pollution in China, you create a pollution to the atmosphere. The atmosphere that we are own as a human being and also a citizen of Earth, right? So when the China conduct this very damaging air pollution, then the atmosphere is dangerous. And we think the impact is not only going to China also, it also jeopardizes the atmosphere in USA. It jeopardizes atmosphere in Bangladesh. That's why there is the sinking of sea level like happens in a lot of countries, even though just China, a lot of developing countries, the one who pollutes it, it affects international society as a whole. That's why we think the responsibility to fix this should also be the responsibility of the whole country, right? And even when you're talking about human dignity, we also believe that right now UN Charter have an imposition on human dignity about UN Charter and protection of human rights that every member of global international society should adhere to. And we think we also believe that this environmental protection is the human dignity and value that we should all adhere to. And we think the status quo right now is not working to fix this, to create a standard of environmental protection, because only developed countries right now that are the only one who fix the inequality. When developing countries, which is most of the majorities of countries in the world, even capitalistic big developing countries like China, create more pollution than the efforts that this developed country has taken in the world. So we think the effort of saving the environment right now is counterproductive, because the when the party itself is collective. Therefore, we think if you want to fix, then create a standard of international responsibility which we think should be equal. You have to make all developed and developing countries to actually opt in and protect cyber collectively. And we think the WTO is the one who can force this country as an international society and part of the international community. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Before I will start, just notification for everyone. If the meeting is a sport, it's a tennis, not a football. So chill down a bit. Use your cheer. Let the debaters control the stage, and not us that control the stage. Okay?
Okay.
Dewan Waste Management to prevent Catalina hurricane. Please. Catalina hurricane is natural disaster. It is not man-made. But further, they want to argue how China, which is already a member of WTO, now WTO will lose one of the biggest economic power in the world. You will lose the whole trade, ladies and gentlemen. Now further, second clarification. Many of their arguments in fact to us are not environmental dependent. We also depend on environment. But we feel like minimum wage and environment is a different issue. Minimum wage is answering what humanity. It's about everyone who's getting every capability, but government is not needing to sacrifice anything. But environment is a luxury. The starting point is different from the developed and developing countries. That's why the biggest requirement to develop comes in. Just to develop, for example, pay a lot to developing countries. It should not be the developing countries who want to self-develop be rejected just because of their proposal. And further, in fact, in clarification, many of the arguments only actually more environmentally bad on economy. So the first half of this argument should be disregarded. It's only actually of how economic and environmental dependent. We agree on it. But further reference, the number aspect of 5%, it should be a prerequisite, and why there is no internal exchange. But exactly because of their explanation, exactly because there is an internal motivation to repair the environment to make economy more sustainable, this is more sustainable. They have to prove why the country work in China, but especially WTO has to step in and bridge the cooperation which is played by Arena. And further, third clarification. Just believe fact, which is in fact very important, China is improving and Brazil now is improving. And for the information, Brazil is changing before WTO entering, and further they change to, for example, make a brand of clean energy. I tell you this, and I'm pretty sure about it. Now, 3 points of contention regarding this. First, the only reason why they say it's a prerequisite because it creates fair competition. First of all, it is inconsistent between one way they try to say that environment destroy economic due to agriculture and things, but in the other hand, environment allow economic strategy to exploit more and more and more, therefore it's unfair, inconsistent. But further, they try to say, oh, how is fair competition? How they can be fair? Because for example, fair competition is never a good parameter, because it's about economics, not about environment. But further, some developing countries, for example, would be jeopardized because now they need to update to a certain standard. It's unfair to begin with. You have to mention also that you are rejecting one of the biggest potential markets. For example, you expand your free trade agreement, which is also beneficial for the co-member in country, which is your own constituent. And second contention regarding the political cost. Ladies and gentlemen, rejecting FTA because society of the local countries couldn't see the benefit. But we never characterize the society because currently, for example, the country could make a bilateral agreement, so there is a leeway regarding the situation, we never show why. But further, even if yes, within the political cost very much evil because now you sacrifice society. But we further argue to you of how the status quo is okay and what this digressing if they argue this, because the status quo, for example, talking about the alcohol, the wasabi, and patient is there, but the moment they apply this bacteria percentage pretty much sensitive, then they will demonize the idea of environment. And they just this is the hindrance for us to develop further. And last thing about sovereignty bridge. But this is much question because they want to bridge one of the sovereignty of a certain nation is to be this. Currently, US troops in Iraq is being retracted. Even there is a human rights violation there. Meaning what? Meaning the world are now respecting the sovereignty because they believe the country is trackable. Especially because we are talking about environment, but then we should track the country. No country wants their country to be polluted, but they are understand of how much capability they could take on, and especially because regretting the free trade agreement will bring that impact, which is my argument. Now, my argument. Secondly, let's say we agree when WTO has an international environment, then we think their proposal will be redirected to the environmental movement in the status quo. Why so? Because currently, when a country decides to apply to a free trade area under the WTO, what is that kind of country? That kind of country having a blooming company, and they give that the biggest, the best strategy for their own nation will be to be reliant on the international market. Because FTA will help in several ways. First, it will help to provide international products. Because providing international products with a lower barrier, meaning cheaper product, will increase consumption inside. Consumption, for example, FTA will be needed because it attracts more. More countries will be joining, it's more competitive, so the price will be going down. And further, it will reduce the barrier, meaning reducing price, so the society can access better. What happens is that it makes the society having more buying power, not thank you, and the money circulating within the society. So that's why FTA is necessary. But further, the ability to export, because currently they will also enlarge their own companies, that's why the companies will also be able to access more markets and having more society meaning the stock. So understanding that FTA is pretty much important. So now I think that it's likely to be successful to increase the economy because it gives them the best strategy. Now what happens is when they are rejected to joining FTA by the WTO, and what happens if they are not rejected? Let's say the best case scenario of they are not rejected. First of all, in the politics level, I think many of multinational companies could come and compete there. And especially because we are talking about many startups, and stuff, which is bounded by the green conduct. One so, because they have an interest to maintain the reputation of their subsidiary. For example, like an uprising towards that company, the moment they use such effort, showing to you of how every society inside the developed countries is concerning about the multinational company. That's why they will always maintain the green conduct. No changing. But further, the moment we have this, the moment the companies will try to establish their own market, they try to appear that this is an exclusive product, an elegant product, which society could adhere to, and with a high, cheaper price. It is pretty much beneficial. Further, the society will also have more examples, more green products to be related. They will, for example, level up their game, and the product gets a choice that is competitive to a more broad economically product. And thirdly, the government necessarily will have more tax. Because of what? They could gain profit not only from the society's income, but currently companies are more, bringing there more jobs here, but also the society, the government could also gain from society and companies. And they have more power to impact. But more importantly, when we are talking about environment, we are talking about technology. And technology in this kind of country is not able to develop by themselves. Therefore, they are pretty much reliant to the international market to supply to them. When we have FTA, they build the company, after they could learn, they could have an example, or even the company has incentive to sell it. So when they are rejected from the FTA, we will lose all the benefits. The benefits is pretty much exclusive towards what? Towards the improvement of environmental standards. At the WTO, even if you have an interest for the environmental standards, like, we think the benefit is not to lose all the benefits, but this benefit is what drives bigger the internal change within the company and within the market. So therefore, let's just trust the market, let's just trust this country not to have a WTO which is pretty much interfering, which currently they have no precedent with. Thank you.
Two biggest mistakes coming from side oppositions. They believe on the idea of internal changes. They also believe on the idea of breach of sovereignty. I'm going to prove you why this idea is irrelevant as debate. Number one, first clarifications. They believe that when people have the ability to actually have money, they can change, there will be organic change, so on and so forth.
Number one, they need to prove why this can be happen. Because in the history or even factually, Mr. Speaker, China is one of the most important countries in trade. They are generating much amount of money without any changes in terms of policies regarding the environmental protection. Even these people is working and generating money from destroying the environment, Mr. Speaker. There will be no any necessity for this individual to press government to actually create the environmental protection, because those environmental protection is the one who's going to limit their capacity in generating money. Second clarification, they believe that the WTO is breaching sovereignty of country. Let's understand, Mr. Speaker. The idea of WTO in itself is breaching sovereignty, Mr. Speaker. The idea of all organization, international organization, is also breaching sovereignty. Why? This is the different kind of breaching sovereignty. Because we see that breaching sovereignty is something that has always been normal, happening in all of the international organizations, specifically in the World Trade Organization. And how we see that World Trade Organization is ban countries to do protectionism. It is a breach of sovereignty towards country. And how the WTO imposes a standard towards the trade. It is a breach of sovereignty towards that country. We don't need an explanation coming from their side. It's something that is relevant to specific. 3 points that I'm going to talk about. Number one, I'm going to talk about the discriminative policies. Second, I'm going to talk about the harms. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the effectiveness of these policies. Firstly, regarding the discriminative. They believe that this is going to be discriminative because country cannot comply to the standard. They're going to become discriminative, so on and so forth. This is contradiction, Mr. Speaker, because they believe in the very first place that these countries have inherent changes to change. Why then? These developing countries has no capacity at all to change by themselves, to change and comply to the environmental protections that we are going to impose toward a certain standard. We also believe that, Mr. Speaker, that this standard is somehow achievable. Why? Because this developing countries is also related toward developed countries. There will be international assistance coming from developed countries towards these developing countries to try to comply toward the environmental protection and policy that has been done with WTO. Why? Because these developed countries rely so much on the trade and also economic benefit coming from these developing countries, Mr. Speaker. Take an example of the United States. The United States is also trading with Indonesia, with also China, with also many developing countries. If these countries are out of the WTO, there will be a significant harm toward this developed country. Therefore, there will be an inherent interest for these developed countries to change and also help these developing countries to still stick in the system of the WTO and the free trade agreement. We say that it is achievable. Even if it is a discriminative policy, we already prove you on how that by default, WTO is already discriminative. Because if the WTO is not discriminative, Mr. Speaker, they will also involve Cuba, they will also involve North Korea, they will involve all of the countries in the world to enter to the free trade agreement and WTO in itself. We say the discrimination is something that is normal and always been happened since the beginning of WTO. They believe that this also different, this also discriminative because there is a different starting point. Let's take an example of another policy that has been implemented by WTO. Minimum wage is also different starting point, Mr. Speaker. The developing countries has no same starting point and imposing the minimum wage in comparison to the developed country. Regarding the protection toward labor, these developing countries have also different capacities in terms of imposing the labor standard in comparison to that developed country. We say that discriminative is not an issue in this debate, that we need to take an importance of this debate. Secondly, they talk about the fair competitions. They responded to something that is really weird, Mr. Speaker, because they believe this is not a fair competition. It's all about the economy, not about the environment, so on and so forth. We say that the environment effective to the fair competitive inside the WTO. Risky has already claimed on how did the idea of you doing a discrimination towards the environmental protections create a less burden towards to produce the same things that those developed countries who complies to the idea of environmental protection. Take an example on China when he tried to develop and also create a new phone which is not actually compliant to the environmental protections in comparison to those developed countries who comply to the environmental protection, which is also going to have a bigger cost. That's why the price of those developed countries is going to be more expensive than the price of China. We say that this is not a healthy competition and fair competition, which is one of the most important values that the WTO needs to uphold in the very first place. We say the issue of discrimination goes to side governments. Secondly, on the idea of effectiveness, they believe that there is an organic changes, but definitely prove to you what is this organic changes. Because if there is an organic changes, Mr. Speaker, this country is not the target of our proposal. Because our proposal is targeting the country who is not having any inherent changes and also organic changes inside that particular country. Where it's going to be effective. We say that it's going to be effective one because we think there will be an economic cost. How countries, especially developing countries, is rely so much to do that. They produce the good and sell it to other country, getting income from export and import. Take an example on China, when they realize 67% of their national income towards the trade rely on the international market. This 67% is something that is really big, Mr. Speaker. There's going to be big economical cost for this country to change. There will be a legitimate reason for this country to comply to the new standard of environmental protection. Second, we also believe there will be a political cost. They believe that this is wrong because we sacrifice people. We see that it is necessary to sacrifice people, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because in terms of political cost, we need to make sure that the people have the capacity and have power to press the government to apply and also comply to the new standard of environmental protection. Take an example on how the most probable reactions towards people. The people are mostly will be impacted toward this condition because people cannot buy things easily. People cannot get good things, the price is getting higher, so on and so forth. We say this is the one that can make sure that there will be a political cost for the politicians to always adhere to the society. Because politicians is always been to see as a populist actor, Mr. President. They will change and also follow the demand of the society to change and comply to the idea of environmental protections. We see that in terms of effectiveness, it is outside the twins. Lastly, regarding the harm, they believe that China will opt out. We don't think so, because China is depending so much on the WTO and also free trade agreement. All of the trade that is happening in China is basically rely on the idea of they selling goods to the international market, because their own current market is basically only in terms of production, Mr. Speaker. They have no any capacity in order to have a purchasing power, because mostly all of the industry in China is producing goods and selling it to the international market. In comparison, we see that the conditions of this environment and also economic sustainable will be better inside government, because we ensure that there will be no any barriers such as environmental damages that can hamper the idea of economic sustainability in terms of productions, consumptions, and also distributions. We also believe that this is better. In comparison to the proposal, even if there is inherent interest, there are only several countries that have an inherent interest and also organic change to change and comply with environmental protection. With all of these reasons, we are very close to close the case outside government.
Mr. Speaker, their best scenario is that conflict will change, right, to be more environmentalist. But this is an assumption. It's not an argument, because they never explain to you that how that kind of stance would happen. Explanation comes from third speaker. Say that there will be economic loss, Mr. Speaker. But we understand that there will be economic loss. But you have to understand that making green technology, for example, making environmental policies, is also expensive in the It results in an expensive price for the products. The political stance for the country, for example, they want to make an accessible price, for example. Therefore, they stick to the current technology that might be environmental destructive. Their burden is to show you that why that kind of stance this country has is invalid, because even in this very present status quo, WTO never have any intentions to change the political agenda of every government, because they understand that it's the nature of government to ensure the welfare of their society, right? POI of Christie It's not POI of Christie regarding Brazil changing to be environmentalist. It's not showing Brazil will be harder or easier to get into the FTA, but it is showing commitment to change environment. It's not exclusively from their proposal, There's a lot of influences and there's a lot of ways for countries to change themselves. Therefore, we think there is a very something for them, and there is no response. But second of all, when they said actually, we need to consider sustainable economy, right? We think this is very intuitive. When they said actually it is environment and we need to consider environment. But the problem is, they never prove to you and establish you what constitutes sustainable economy in itself, because on our side, understanding that the nature of WTO is considering the sustainable economy, we think that there's so many factors that you have to consider when you talk about sustainable economy. You talk about market power, for example. You talk about availability of products. You talk about accessibility of the products to be transferred, for example. That is the concept of sustainable economy. That's why even if, for example, India or Indonesia or even South Africa, they conduct certain environmental destruction in their environment, we never say them as not a sustainable economy because they're still powerful. Therefore, if your understanding ideas regarding the sustainable economy of WTO, we still stand because we prove that idea of sustainable economy still exists in our side, Mr. Speaker. 2 points I would like to point out within that case, right? Number one, we think that their proposal solely rely on the effectivity and capacity of the country, Mr. Speaker. We think that's maybe they're being very dismissive with our characterizations when we talk about discriminative treatment that exists in the status quo today. But second of all, we think that their mechanism is a loophole, because the first speaker said that they will provide a time frame, Mr. Speaker, which means that time frame will allow the countries to compromise the interest in the pre-requisite itself, which what happened in the status quo right now. We are not enforcing countries, we are allowing countries to put their option, for example. We are allowing countries, we encourage them to have a practice of a good environmental assessment. We think that the proposal is a shame. Let's go to the classes I'm going to talk with this bit. First of all, is it morally justified for the WTO to conduct this proposal? And second, regarding the effectivity, right? Let's go to the first one, regarding the justifications, right? So we said clearly actually it is not going to be justified because it's going to be discriminative, right? Response from Dadi saying actually this is not a breach of sovereignty. We never argue argumentations regarding breach of sovereignty. But we are trying to say to you that this is a discriminative treatment that we should not allow happen to WTO, Mr. Speaker. Because if we talk about the comparisons of developed and developing countries, we think that developed countries has enjoyed a lot of past privilege. For example, they started the industrial revolutions, and maybe they are the one who contributed the most to the impact of air pollution in the status quo today, Mr. Speaker. It's not the developing countries. We think this is standards that we need to respect for us, because maybe these developing countries in the past time, they did not contribute to the air pollution, they did not contribute to the destruction of the environment. It is the developed countries, and these developed countries right now have a lot of money due to the environmental destructions that they have in the past. This is a discriminative proposal that they make, right? They said actually WTO is never fair. That is wrong, Mr. Speaker, because WTO considers the differences of their members. For example, yes, WTO implement minimum wage, but the minimum wage is not solid and rigid, Mr. Speaker. Every country are allowed to set their own standards of minimum wage, Mr. Speaker. What it shows you? It shows that WTO understands the differences of capacity of countries, developed and developing countries. Their proposal is a step-back mechanism for WTO to dismiss all the interests of WTO to ensure that accessibility of market and sustainable development exists in the society today. Even if they never also argue in regards to how mechanism and status quo exists. For example, developing countries right now, they're engaging in a lot of talks. For example, we have UN talks, we have Kyoto Protocol, we have 1992 Air Convention, for example. That shows you there is initiative for this country to change, right? The burden of you is to show that why your proposal is the only exclusive way for this country want to change their interest in regards to this mindset. First point in this class goes to opposition. But let's look at the second one, where they say that it is hampering the economic sustainability, right? They want to argue that it is hampering the economic sustainability because environmental damage is hampering the system of the economy in itself. But they never explain to you that why that all of disasters, that all of tragedies happen inside of the country is because of the contributions of the environmental conduct in itself. Some disasters, for example, happen by the nature, because you don't know how to calculate it, and it's actually maybe because of the simply of the environment or not, but also maybe because of the practice of the developed countries in the past that contribute to the disaster that happened in the status quo today. For example, the temperature or even maybe the Arctic, for example. But second of all, if that interest is to ensure the safe product, we think this is an objective interest. If that interest to, afraid that weather pollutions might hamper the agricultural products, we think countries understand that. If they believe actually need to maintain agricultural products to be marketable, they need to also ensure that agricultural product is not polluting, for example. Therefore, your proposal is not something that actually changes. Your proposal is not something that actually make it more special, because countries right now have their own consideration to understand that market and their product should be accessible for countries, which means their product should not be polluted, for example. Their proposal is not showing any changes. But let's go to the third point in this class. When the eventually countries would like to go for these options, but we question how it's going to be effective. Because we think actually, in order for them to show that it is going to be effective, they have to show that this is the only exclusive way. But we think free trade agreement is different with trade agreement, Mr. Speaker. Countries still have options to conduct trade agreement. Do these countries have no other options? No. These countries have still other options, as I meant. They never put to you that why, when this country do not want to engage in free trade agreement, they will not resort to the trade agreement, the common trade agreement, for example, because they still have a lot of money in resource to add this money. But we think that our proposal still maintain the best interest of WTO, because what we're going to do to you is that we're going to invite this country to come to our market, and we're going to have a better economic sustainability. But in a hand in hand, we can also encourage this country. They believe actually we need to have this country, we need to be cooperative with this country. But in order to be cooperative with this country, we need to be close to this country. Your proposal is making this country, being more distant to our side. In our side, we're going to make this country come close to us, and we can encourage them to practice environmentalism. It should not go to the obligatory, because we cannot right now internally from exist. They never put they were.
In ideal world, economic development does not sacrifice the environment or anything. But we're not living in a utopic world where everything pleases you, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a very important consideration for the judges, right? First of all, this is not only a debate about what is and how we should solve the problem of environmental degradation. But this is a debate about what's the right principle that WTO needs to take and adhere at creating policies. We say, on our side of the house, we are happy to see the eradication of environmental degradation, but their policy is not the way to go, which I'm going to talk more in my substantive. And it might seem very intuitive for them to say, environment is very important, but ladies and gentlemen, a team should not win just because they're very intuitive and just throwing rhetorics without even telling what is the best scenario on their side of the house. We also consider that environmental regulation is harmful, right? Now, in my speech, I'm going to talk about two things. First of all, whether or not this is a fair and representative policy that is in line with what WTO and help them achieve their main purpose. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the sustainable development to create sustainable change, right? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, they said that WTO should not, their idea is that WTO should always reach sovereignty. That's why they need a prerequisite. But this is very important. On our side of the house, we don't against prerequisite to begin with. But what we're against is a prerequisite that is unrealistic and imposing a burden that is not going to be achieved by countries, because this is something that they dismissed in my speech and in my whole argumentation, right? On how WTO acknowledged that developing countries and developed countries have different development trajectory, and right now, developed countries already have a better starting point, which is they're more privileged to create an environmentally friendly policies and also equipment, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, at the end of the day, in their side of the house, those who are going to be engaged in free trade agreement are only developed countries, which we say is very dominated by developed countries. That is not a fair access of free trade. That is harming the developing countries. That is something that we don't want. The main purpose of WTO, which they also dismiss, is on how WTO wants a fair access to enter free trade, regardless you are developed or developing countries. Secondly, they give you the analogy of minimum wage. This is very weird. Now, minimum wage and environmental standard is totally different. First of all, minimum wage that is imposed by WTO is not uniform to begin with. In your side of the house, you're going to impose a uniform standard of environmental friendly product, for example, ladies and gentlemen. That is different. That's why WTO is not putting an imposing standard that is bad. Then they're talking about internal motivation, right? They said there's no changing at all. Reality check, ladies and gentlemen, China's law regarding environment is progressing. Secondly, Brazil back then is the biggest polluted country, one of the biggest polluted countries. Right now, the way they deal with the forest degradation is really good, ladies and gentlemen. The difference in our side of the house and their side of the house, in our side, we're going to wait for countries to be ready, and that is better, rather than if you push them and you impede their development, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a funny line of logic coming from them, right? They explain that environment is that important, everyone knows it. And under their side of the house, it means that the government and also companies knows that there is a huge cost if you are always exploiting the environment, which we said, that's why internal motivation happens. Secondly, about sustainable development to create sustainable environment. First of all, they are very dismissive towards my argument about how their ideas is going to impede development of developing countries. You're you're going to lose a large amount of money, because if you engage in free trade, you're going to get a lot of profit with this new one. You can use and allocate that profit to make sure that sustainable development happens. They never rebut it. Secondly, we also said that research and development, when you're talking about environmental protection, is extremely expensive. That's why on their side of the house, when you impede the ability of developing countries to enter free trade agreement, you're going to widening the gap of development between developing countries and developed countries. At the end, no sustainable development. Secondly, our argument is also not rebutted when Arbut said that free trade agreement from WTO is necessary to provide supporting system regarding market and technology to change environmental calculus of government. That's why we cannot have a team that is very dismissive and not engaging and only intuitive to win this.
If they say that our side is dismissive, we think that their side is also dismissive also. Because we already talked to you about how we think the principle of economy is not only economic growth for the countries, but it's also about sustainable economy. It's also about protection of the economy of other international society. And we think even if the principle is economical profit, we simply believe that environment destruction is the one who creates an economical destruction and economical problem. How it cuts access to trade because of informal destruction, it cuts productivity of food and agriculture because of the flood. It harms the people's lives and the consumers' buying ability because of this environmental destruction. If you are a body to champion the economy, you are a body that side with our side. But before that, some clarification. They believe that our policy will not work because there is time frame. First of all, the complaint is very late, and we think it is a fixed time frame. If you cannot fulfill it, you get going to be kicked out, right? But then again, they say in the second, it's unnecessary policy because right now there's already inherent incentive, such as Brazil, such as China. Well, even if there's already inherent incentive, why don't these countries actually agree and can actually have the capital to accept to this policy, right? And you say that no, because if you cut this, you will go and create an economical destruction to this country, therefore they will not have the economy. Well, before you create this economical destruction, before you reject this policy, you can actually consider your country, like when you still have a free trade agreement, to actually change your system right now, when you have the capital right now to fulfill the requirements. And even when they say that free trade harms the profit of company, we also never believe it's clear, because Danny and Rizky already talked to you about how free trade agreement would this kind of would make all kind of prices the same, right? There's not going to be an economic or comparative loss to other country. And even if we already talked to you about how even if there is an economic loss, we also believe it's okay because it's a comparative advantage that is disrupting the country. It's a comparative advantage that is unfair and is exploitative. That's why we do not think minimum wage is something that is minimum exploitation of minimum wage or workers' protection is something that is okay. But they again complain. No, minimum wage and environmental requirements are different. First of all, this complaint is coming really late in the third speaker, right? And second, we think even right now, we also understand that developing countries have several disabilities. That's why in my alternative mechanism, I talked to you about how they can create a joint partnership, how FDD and UN can actually help this developing country to ease the burden to require adherence to the relationship. So we think this kind of, even if we think at the end of it, it's still different starting point. Daniel is going to talk to you, but different starting point is not a parameter, right? On how, even if this industrial country, how they have more capital and to create more border protection and minimum wage, developing countries that have different country should also comply to it, right? But then, let's discuss their best case scenario on how this country can change inherently. Well, how when they have profit, they have educated middle class, they're going to change. First of all, we don't think they're going to change, because if you gain profit from this destroyment, if you create education from this destroyment of this environment, you're going to create a fake reality for people living in those countries. They're destroyed, that having a job, that getting education is still okay, and they do not realize that their job that they're getting, their money, their education they're getting is it's on the behest on the environment, because they live on comfortability level. That's why right now the people in China, even though they're rich, they're educated, they never pushes the government to change the political system. If you want internal change, if you want inherent change, you go to our side, because we're going to also impose burden to the society, to the government, directly to create a structural change in their fund. They're going to push society to be mad at the government. Why are you destroying the economy? Why are you destroying the environment? Because of you are destroying the environment, I cannot get the goods, I cannot get product. They feel what the Bangladesh people who are there thinking, feeling. So we think this creates the economical and political laws to change the country in the status quo. And they say it's not effective because the other country to create other partnership. This is late. I will not respond to that. And even we think right now, when you're talking about environment, WTO is not longer a profit-oriented body. When you're talking about WTO, they also move into already a more humane and universal approach of economy and values and human